Hi, Psych 210. Our presentation today is about the top 3 things you should know about standard deviation. First of all, we're going to learn how to calculate standard deviation, and then we're going to learn how to apply standard deviation. And finally, we'll end with a visual representation of standard deviation for all those who are visual learners. Alright, so let's calculate the standard deviation. In order to calculate the standard deviation, first you need to find the mean of your dataset. After that, find the difference between scores and the mean. Then square those differences. Next, you're going to sum the square of those differences. After that, for the population, you're going to want to divide by n. For a sample, you divide by n minus 1. Finally, square root the answer that you've already found. Alright, so let's look at the formula for standard deviation. For a population, you have the square root of the sum of the differences between your score and mean squared over n. For a sample, same thing, but with n minus 1. Alright, so standard deviation is used for things like z-score, which is helpful in comparisons of different scales.
So basically what that means is that you could compare things like how well you did on the ACT to how well you did on the SAT, as long as the data has a normal distribution. Z-scores are basically the amount of standard deviations away from the mean. And so in this case, standard deviations are the units that we use to talk about z-scores. In order to calculate the z-score, you need both the mean and the standard deviation. With the z-score, the new scale will always end up with a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. So in order to do this, you must take your variable, subtract it by the mean, and then divide it by the standard deviation. The reason that the score must be divided by the standard deviation is because the standard deviation isn't affected by adding or subtracting a constant. It's affected by dividing and multiplying by a constant. And with z-scores, you're basically comparing variables in units of standard deviation as long as it's in a normal distribution.
Building on the normal distribution, let's talk about the empirical rule and how it applies to standard deviation. We can see what percentages of our data falls within 3 standard deviations of the mean by using the empirical rule. This rule states that 68% of our data falls within 1 standard deviation of the mean, 95% of our data falls within 2 standard deviations of the mean, and 99.7% of our data falls within 3 standard deviations of the mean. The visual behind me is to help in understanding this principle on a normal distribution. Thank you for watching.
Created using Powtoon.